Welcome to the halfway point. Your 40s are the decade the math finally gets honest. The first time in your life, the question, am I behind, actually has a real answer, whether you want it or not. In your 20s, the number was near zero, and that was fine. In your 30s, it started to move, but slowly. Now you are standing at the middle of a working life. The runway is still long, but no longer endless, and the numbers have gotten big enough to feel real. So today we take this decade apart, honestly and without the shame, and I show you exactly where you actually stand. Here is how this goes. First, I place you on the money hill, the arc your net worth traces across a whole life, so you can see exactly where the 40s sit on it. Then I give you the two numbers for your bracket, the average and the median, because the gap between them is the entire story. Then we open 6 unlocks specific to this decade. The benchmark that makes everyone anxious. The last stretch where time still does heavy lifting. Why peak income arrives with peak spending. The real dollar cost of a slow start. Why what your net worth is made of matters as much as its size, and how two people earning the same can end up worlds apart. These are Federal Reserve figures brought to today's dollars. Let us find your spot on the hill. Picture the money hill one more time. Net worth across a lifetime is not a straight line climbing forever. It is a slope. It starts near zero in your 20s, inches up through your 30s, and then, right here in your 40s, it hits the steep middle. This is the fast part of the climb, where the ground under you tilts up hard, and the number can finally move in big jumps. You are not at the top. The summit is decades away, in your late 60s. But you are past the flat bottom. You are on the part of the hill where every step gains real elevation, and also the part where, if you look down, you can finally see how far you have come and how far is left. Now the two numbers, and watch the gap. For households in the 45 to 54 bracket, the average net worth is around $975,000, knocking on the door of $1 million. And if that number just landed in your chest like a stone, hold on, because the median, the real person standing in the exact middle of everyone your age, is about $247,000. That is a quarter of the headline. The average is dragged up by a handful of very wealthy households and describes almost no one. The median is you. Remember that gap, because it is not a rounding error. It is the exact size of the lie the internet keeps telling you about this decade. Everything we cover next lives inside it. Let us start with the rule you have almost certainly seen, because it is the source of most of the anxiety in this decade. There is a popular rule of thumb, you have seen it in 100 articles, that says by 40 you should have roughly 3 times your annual salary saved. 3 times. So if you earn $80,000, this rule wants to see $240,000 in the bank by the time you blow out the candles at 40. Here is what nobody tells you about that number. It was never a law of physics. It is a smoothed, tidy target built by assuming you started saving a healthy percentage in your early 20s and never stopped, in a market that behaved. It is a fine North Star. But treated as a verdict, a pass or fail line you either cleared or failed, it is quietly brutal, because most real lives do not run in a clean straight line. People change careers, take time off, pay for school, raise kids, weather a bad decade in the market, and this is exactly the decade where comparison peaks. Think about why. In your 20s, nobody's number is big enough to compare. In your 40s, everyone's number is finally large and visible. The houses, the cars, the casual mention of the portfolio at a dinner party. The benchmarks are loud, the peers are visible, and the internet is happy to tell you the average is nearly $1 million. So the anxiety spikes right here, at the exact moment the gap between the average and the real median is at its most misleading. If you are at the 200,000 median and you have only ever seen the 3 times rule and the $1 million average, you feel like a failure. You are not. You are standing in the middle of your entire generation. Here is the unlock that should light a fire under this decade, in the good way. Compounding, the force that quietly makes money out of money, needs one ingredient above all others, and that ingredient is time. And in your 40s, you still have a serious amount of it. Not as much as the 25-year-old, but a real, usable runway, roughly 20 good years before a normal retirement, and often more. 20 years is enough for compounding to do genuinely heavy lifting. Money invested in your mid-40s can still roughly double, sometimes more, before you touch it. The doubling just happens once or twice instead of the 4 or 5 doublings a 20-year-old gets. So the 40s sit in a very specific and very important place on the timeline. This is the last decade where time is still your ally rather than your problem. After this, in your 50s and 60s, every year you add contributes less growth, because there is simply less runway left for it to grow across. That is why this decade matters so much more than it feels like it should. It is the last stretch where a dollar invested still gets to become several before you need it. The 25-year-old's dollar becomes 10. Your dollar becomes 2 or 3. The 55-year-old's dollar barely gets to grow at all. The math is not cruel here. It is generous, but on a clock. You are not out of time, but you can, for the first time, see the edge of it from here, and that is exactly the pressure that should turn into action, not shame. The move is to treat every dollar you invest in this decade as one of the last that still gets a real head start. Now the cruel arithmetic at the heart of the 40s, and once you see it, a lot of frustration makes sense. This is, for most careers, peak earning territory. The salary is the highest it has ever been. The raises and the seniority have stacked up. On paper, this should be the decade you save like a machine. Except this is also, for most households, peak spending. The exact same years that bring the biggest paycheck bring the most expensive version of your life. The mortgage is in full swing. The kids are teenagers now, and teenagers are astonishingly expensive. All activities and appetites, and the looming shadow of college tuition. Maybe you are helping aging parents at the same time, so the money comes in at its highest rate and goes out at its highest rate, and the gap between them, the part you actually get to keep, can stay stubbornly thin even on a great income. This is the trap of the 40s. And it is different from the lifestyle creep trap of the 30s. This is not frivolous spending. This is real, load-bearing, often unavoidable life expense arriving all at once. The danger is assuming that a peak income automatically means peak saving, and then wondering, at 50, why the number did not grow the way the salary did. The households that build wealth in this decade are the ones who watch the gap between what comes in and what goes out and defend it deliberately, precisely because everything in their life is conspiring to close it. Here is the unlock nobody enjoys, but everybody needs. In your 20s, the cost of not starting was invisible, an abstraction, a lecture from someone older that you nodded at and ignored. In your 40s, that cost stops being abstract and becomes a specific dollar figure you can almost read off a page. Think about it plainly. If two people both want to retire with the same amount, the one who started at 25 was letting decades of compounding carry most of the load. Their own contributions were the small part. The one who starts seriously at 45 has lost that free labor. Time is not doing the heavy lifting for them anymore, so they have to do it themselves, out of their own paycheck. Which means the late starter often has to save 2, 3, sometimes 4 times as much per month to arrive at the same place. That is the price tag of a slow start, and in your 40s you can finally see the number. But, and this matters, this is not a eulogy. It is a bill, not a sentence. The catch-up is absolutely possible in this decade because two things are true at once. Your income is at its peak, and the tax system gives people in this stage extra room to shovel money into retirement accounts. So yes, starting late costs more per month than starting early would have, but the 40s are still squarely within the window where a determined late start genuinely works. It is pricier. It is not too late. Those are very different sentences. And this is the last decade you can comfortably say the second one. Here is a subtle one that trips up almost everyone in this bracket. By your 40s, the number on paper can look genuinely healthy. But that number is not one thing. It is made of very different kinds of money, and they are not interchangeable. What your net worth is made of matters as much as how big it is. Break it apart. A big slice is often home equity, the value of your house minus the mortgage. That is real wealth, but you cannot spend it at the grocery store. It is locked inside the walls you live in. Another slice is retirement accounts, also real, also largely locked away until you are older without penalty. And then there is the actual liquid money, cash and accessible savings, which for many households in this bracket is the thinnest slice of all. So you can be, on paper, a household worth $500,000 and still be one surprise car repair away from a stressful month. House rich, cash poor is the classic 40s condition. This is why net worth on paper and financial security are not the same thing. Two households can post the identical net worth, and one is genuinely secure while the other is fragile, because one has a balanced mix of equity, retirement, and accessible cash, and the other has everything trapped in a house and a retirement account they cannot touch. The unlock is to stop staring only at the total and start looking at the composition. How much of your number could you actually use if life demanded it this month? That question matters more in this decade than the size of the number itself. And this brings us to the widest truth of the decade, the one that separates the 40s from everything before it. Back in your 30s, the savers and the spenders started to pull apart. By your 40s, that small gap has widened into a chasm. You can take two people the same age, with nearly identical careers and nearly identical lifetime paychecks, and find one worth $600,000 and the other worth $60,000. Same income. 10 times the net worth. How? Not salary. Salary is the thing everyone assumes explains it, and salary is barely a factor here. What explains it is 20 years of small, compounding behavioral differences finally cashing out. One of them started investing early and let it ride. One waited. One kept their lifestyle roughly flat when the raises came. The other let every raise get swallowed by a bigger house and a nicer car. One automated the savings, so it happened whether they felt like it or not. The other saved only what happened to be left over, which was usually nothing. None of those choices felt dramatic in any single month. Compounded over 20 years, they become a chasm. This is the most hopeful and the most sobering unlock at once. Sobering, because if you are on the wrong side of that gap, your salary alone will not rescue you. Behavior got you here, and only behavior gets you out. Hopeful, because it means the person ahead of you did not have a secret, a windfall, or a gift you lacked. They had habits, and habits, unlike salary and unlike time already spent, are the one thing you can still change starting this month. So how do you actually beat the median in this decade? How do you land on the right side of that chasm? It is not complicated, and it is not a secret. It is two moves done deliberately. Move 1, max out the tax-advantaged accounts while your income is at its peak, and the system is giving you extra room. This is the single highest leverage action available to you right now. High income plus expanded contribution limits plus 20 years of runway is a combination you will never have all three of again, so use them together now while you have them. Automate it so it happens before your expensive life can spend it. Move 2. Close the composition gap. Stop measuring yourself only by the total on paper. Build a balanced number, some equity, yes, but also real retirement savings and a genuine cushion of accessible cash so that a paper-wealthy household is also a secure one. And then, quietly, refuse to let peak income turn into peak spending. Defend the gap between what you earn and what you keep, precisely because everything in this decade is trying to close it. Do those two things, and you will pass the median. Not because you got exceptional, but because you got deliberate in the exact decade most people drift. So tell me in the comments, at 40-something, are you above the median, above the average, or building your way there? Wherever you landed today, the next dollar you invest still moves you up this hill, and there is still real time to climb. If this made the math feel honest instead of frightening, there is a community doing exactly this in the link below, and a lot more of this decade-by-decade ladder to climb on the channel. This is education, not financial advice. And next time we climb into your 50s, the decade the clock speeds up, where you can no longer out-compound a late start, and the question stops being, am I behind, and becomes, is this enough? I will see you there.